to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host and daughter,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation, as well as in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. Well, Heidi, we've got a really interesting topic today, and I know one that you and I have thought about a lot, and that's involved with men in grief. Gary Mendell, and he is with an organization called Shatterproof that he has started to shatter the stigma of drug abuse. And really, you're going to find some wonderful ideas. And he does that in the name of his son, Brian, and we appreciate all the work he's with. Gary Mendell, thank you for being on the show
Hi,
today.
Gary.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Brian was my oldest son, and just before high school, like most children in this country, he experimented with alcohol and other drugs, and he grew dependent on them. And it got worse over the years. And he went to 8 different treatment programs.
Wow.
For addiction from the time he was 17 through age 25. And he seemed to be getting better. The last program he attended, after he was there, he did really well for a little over a year. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, he took his life.
Wow. And you, fast forward, that was 3 years ago.
Yes.
And fast forward, you decided to take some action about this, and tell us about that and Shatterproof.
People from all over the country that knew Brian were calling me, writing me letters, emailing me about how Brian had helped them. And so I got the idea of starting a small charity. And really the thought was a small local charity.
Right.
And I decided to take some time off of work, develop a business plan for this small charity. I learned some things that really struck me that I just didn't know when Brian was alive. I was always reading and learning, but I was always reading and learning how to help Brian. I wasn't thinking about what was going on in the country. Now I was thinking about how to help others, and I just was struck by some information that shocked me. I had no idea how many people were touched by this disease. If you had asked me 3 years ago, how many people in my town, how many fathers in my town had a son who was addicted, I would have said, I'm it. There's probably a few others, but nobody talks about it, so I don't know who they are.
Right.
25 million Americans are actively addicted today.
25 million Americans.
Which
That's
is 1 in
amazing.
10 above the age of 12.
Wow.
Which is, when you then put in family members around them,
Yeah.
that's 1/4 of American families. Every single day, 350 Americans die related to alcohol or other drugs. How do you get people to pay attention to addiction? It's not going to probably be with a walk that everyone else is doing your first couple of years.
Right.
It might be down the road, but how do you make a change in society to get people to think about what you're doing and bring attention to it? So the idea came up of rappelling off of buildings.
I love that idea.
And that's
Well, let's
the
show that
Shatterproof
video,
Challenge.
and then we're going to introduce Chuck Collins, and then I want to interview you and Chuck together
Sure.
about some of your hopes and dreams, and
Sure.
let people know what they can do to help your organizations.
Sure, thank you.
So let's watch that video of rappelling off of buildings, I believe.
There are 25 million Americans actively addicted to alcohol and other drugs. We are coming together to increase awareness and funding for the prevention, treatment, and recovery of this disease.
I'm rappelling for my son, Paul.
I'm rappelling for my dad.
To support my son is an addict.
I'm rappelling for my sister-in-law.
That was awesome!
Go Shatterproof! Go
Chuck is the president of the National Board of Directors for the Compassionate Friends.
Chuck, talk a little bit about Tiffany and what happened with her and some of the things you and your wife have done.
Well, Tiffany was 19 years old. She was 13 days shy of 20. She was a student at Clemson University. And all seemed well. And the only symptom that she had was a sore throat. And in the process of a weekend, she went from a sore throat to being hospitalized. And 3 days later, she died of bacterial meningitis.
That's amazing.
We discovered that that was a condition. It's an infection that affects people who live in close environments. The military inoculates for it, and prisons inoculate for it.
Wow.
But at that time, the colleges were not. And so as a result of that...
And what year was this? How long
This was
been?
1996.
Okay.
And so at that time, they weren't really saying much about bacterial meningitis at the college level. And so my wife Kathy began following the National Meningitis Association and learned a lot from them in terms of what could be done. And I encourage any family that has college-age children to go and pay attention to the National Meningitis Association. They're on Facebook. They have a great, they will constantly update you on the latest updates as far as meningitis goes. For example, Tiffanie died of the C strain of meningitis, for which there was a vaccine. If anybody had told her that there had been 4 other cases of meningitis in the Clemson area, she would have taken it.
Oh my.
So Chuck, fast forward, you and your wife got involved with the Compassionate Friends. And tell us about the Compassionate Friends. How did you get involved?
Compassionate Friends was something, I had been an old cop. We don't do support groups. So when somebody said, let's go to the Compassionate Friends, you two need to go to the Compassionate Friends. We had never heard of it, we didn't know anything about it. But within 2 weeks, we went to the first meeting. I actually got commandeered in the parking lot by the chapter leader, which is the only way I got in there.
Wow.
But in the process, I was really glad that I did, because there were moms and dads in there, brothers and sisters and grandparents, telling what happened to them. This is basically mentors. These are parents that have survived. Most important thing you see when you walk through that door, these are people who lost a loved one and they survived it.
Yeah.
You know, at a time when you're not sure. You know, to see that is huge. And then to hear the issues that their experiences that they're going through. And they're the same kind of things that you think you're going crazy.
Totally.
You know, in your life. And then to hear them explain what they've been through is just incredible. And
And
so
it
the bond
normalizes
that
it for you, probably. And you think, well, wow, I'm not going crazy. Other people have been on this path and made it. I'm going to make it.
It's absolutely true. And you form a bond in there that is just unbreakable in terms of you get phone numbers of people you can call night or day. You know, obviously you're very depressed in the very, very beginning. And these are people that give you hope. I mean, you go to these Compassionate Friends meetings. We have 692 chapters around the country. And they meet at least once a month. Some of them meet more frequently than that. And there's no cost to go to a Compassionate Friends meeting. So anyone who's lost a child, a sibling, or grandchild is welcome to go to those meetings.
And you can also go to the National Conference, which is fabulous, and it's in July every year. And wrote this great book, Holding On to Love, Searching for Hope When a Child Dies. Yeah.
That actually was a product of, I was a chapter leader for 5 years. And as a process of being a chapter leader, there were so many things that parents were curious about when they go to these meetings. They would ask so many questions. And there were times where you worry about parents. I would see some parents come through and they would have the same behavior I had. Because I wasn't sure about tomorrow when I went to my first meeting. And I would see some come through that they weren't too sure about theirs. And so by loaning them a book from our library at the chapter, I could say, look, how about taking a look at this particular chapter?
What do you guys make of men in grief? I mean, do you guys talk to each other? What's going on?
I think what we used to do is we would break it. Normally it's a mixed group. And when I first started going, it was predominantly women. And by the time I stepped down, it was at least a third men.
Wow.
Every month that were coming. And so we break up into groups, and every once in a while, and the women would be in one room and the men would be in the other room. And the men would talk about their grief and what they're going through, and the women would talk about the men.
I love that.
Women are really predisposed to cry hormonally because they produce oxytocin. So there's a natural predilection for women to cry more than men do.
Everyone grieves differently.
Yeah, it's true.
It wasn't a gender thing. I think everyone grieves differently.
But the difficult part is that oftentimes we're all grieving differently, and maybe we all want different things. And within a family, how do you compromise? If my mom wants to bake a cake for my brother's birthday to celebrate, to pay tribute to him and honor him, I might not want that. That might be too difficult for me with the family singing to nobody. You know, they're singing to his memory.
Right.
And so you see that a lot. When I work with families, I see that a lot. We have to figure out, how do we compromise? And what happens when parents don't want to celebrate the holidays, but their kids are like, wait a minute, what about us?
Right.
I mean, you had little kids, and I don't know how old yours were, but your sons were fairly young.
We went through that, especially for Christmas, because Tiffanie loved Christmas. And so the last thing we wanted to do was to celebrate Christmas, but we have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. And so we were very blessed to have friends in Las Vegas who invited us out. And so we went to Las Vegas, where it looks like Christmas all year round. So it's, you know, you can kind of forget that it's Christmas while you're there. And so we did that 2 years. You know, they were great to allow us to come out there. The third year out, we did. In fact, we had in our development, we have a a prize. They give a ham for the house that's lit up the most. And so I got them involved, and my wife got them involved in us decorating our house, and it was like atrocious. I mean, there were lights everywhere. We were blowing fuses left and right.
Oh, that's funny.
And but we won the ham.
What would you like our audience to know about the future? How would you like them to dial in? Do you know more about you? Why don't you start, Chuck?
Well, I guess what I would want to make
And
sure...
take a look at those guys and tell them out there.
I guess what I would want everyone to know is that there is a Compassionate Friends. And it's really important. You know, you're going to know somebody sooner or later who loses a child, a sibling or a grandchild. And this is a safe place for you to send them. When a parent loses a child, they're really not anxious to hear that, you know, God has a plan. And so by going to these meetings and talking to other parents and siblings and grandparents that have lost a child, they can rediscover hope in their lives. This is out there. It doesn't cost them anything to go to these meetings. And so please, www.compassionfriends.org.
I went to many support groups after my son Brian passed away, and I found it really, really helpful. So no one can really understand what you're going through except for other people are going through at the same time. Be out there on the rooftops, ending the stigma of this disease. That's what it's about. It's not hiding and shame, it's coming out in public and talking about this as a disease.
Hazardous grieving should not be done alone.
Yeah.
So true.
It's not the way that they died, it's the way that they lived.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both so much for being on the show, and thank you for all the work you're doing with Compassionate Friends and with Shatterproof. And we want to say to all of you, thanks for watching our show today.